Hey everyone, welcome to a special bonus episode of Electoral Dysfunction, the show where comedians and experts debate the news of the week from the safety of their quarantine. I'm your host, Tom Brennan. This week's show, we got into a really lengthy discussion about the circumstances in Kenosha and the response from sports leagues, particularly the NBA. It was a great conversation, and we've opted to cut it from the main show and present it as a bonus episode here so we can hear it in its entirety. So it's really gets into some really important nuance about race in America, about policing in America, and about protest and its power. So please sit back and enjoy what you're about to hear. Will be Marcely Jean-Pierre, Megan O'Malley, Lana Duffy, and Robert George joining me to talk about Kenosha. Ned Thorne, star wipe us over there. Let's talk a little bit. I want to talk about the situation in Kenosha, and we can talk about it, I think, through the prism of the reaction. And I think what's similar to the context around this young man who went to Kenosha, like the context does matter. And I think part of it is like when we don't have all of those facts, like it does devolve into a very, black and white thing, wrong words, when describing these.
It's Rashomonic as well too, because
but I think it also robs us from the ability to really examine, like a sort of like there are certain things that are right and wrong, and when these right and wrongs get blurred when we don't talk clearly about the entire set of circumstances. So Jacob Blake is still alive, a man in Kenosha. The police were called because he was at the home of an ex-girlfriend, was not supposed to be there. He had an outstanding warrant, although I believe that warrant had been voided at this point. But he was not supposed to be there. Police arrived. There were disagreements, but he was walking away from them, at which point he was shot in the back in front of his car where his children were in the car. I provide all that context because Robert and I were speaking about this earlier. Like it is, because there's so much at play here with who he is, we kind of get caught up in the like, oh, well, did he deserve it, this or that or the other? Maybe he had a knife on him. Like, I think I want to have all that info because I do think an important thing to be said here is, you don't need to be like, we shouldn't reserve not shooting people in the back for the good people. Like that's whatever happens. Like if you're walking away, and I think similar point for the Rittenhouse, like if someone is moving away, that is a time to de-escalate the circumstance. But this touched off, he survived. He is he's still in the hospital, unlikely to walk again. This touched off a week of protests of some rioting as well, which led to, among other things, the NBA basically doing a walkout led by the Milwaukee Bucks from Wisconsin, a walkout on the playoffs, which almost led to the season being canceled until yesterday when agreements were made between the league and the players, which among other things included turning arenas across the country into polling places this fall so that people can have socially distanced polling places. And it's crazy that all happened in the span of 5 days, and it feels like the second most important story of the week. That's the thing that's nuts to me. I'm curious our take on this week and on this sort of unprecedented action that happened.
Yeah, I'm a big NBA fan. I have been since I came out of my mom's womb, because my dad was a big Lakers fan, a Magic Johnson fan. So I was just brought up into loving the NBA and loving basketball. And I was very proud to see all of the athletes step up and stand up for what they believed in and just make a statement, and also be able to express the pain and the trauma that they're experiencing, because so many of us can identify with it. And sometimes it's very difficult to do something that's as fun as playing basketball, even though it's their job, but it can be difficult. And sometimes when we have personal traumas or personal things that are going on, we might call out of work too, or we might want to just take a day or, take some personal time off. I was a little bit conflicted regarding the quickness that things seemed to be resolved, because I wasn't sure if it was, what the circumstances behind them agreeing to return so quickly were. But pretty much what I wanted to see was that when the players did strike, you know, because it really was a strike as opposed to a boycott, which a lot of people are calling it. But when they did choose to strike and not to show up, they just had to have a list of demands, and if those demands were not met, then they don't return to work. And if they are met, then they do return to work. And it seems like they were able to catch the ears of a lot of like politicians and a lot of leaders in the communities that they each respectively play in. And it seems like they're able to get things done. And that was the goal. And it seems like the mission was accomplished. So I'm proud of the stance that the players in the NBA, you know, and all the other leagues as well, the WNBA, you know, and the MLB. Just I think that it was a great, not only just a great action from them, but just like a great moment in time, because it's something, it's historic. It really is a historic day for us, because it's never happened before to this magnitude. So to see the response because of a very specific issue that we've had in this country for so long, it's also refreshing to kind of see that the efforts have not been deflated from like the George Floyd momentum.
Exactly, and there was some point, I don't know whether it was Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday, because they all sort of kind of merged together, but there was actually some talk about canceling the playoffs, canceling the NBA playoffs, which I mean, I think would have been a disastrous PR move, and instead this idea of they basically take off 1 day or 2 days, and then get the NBA management to agree to workable reforms. And I mean, I think one of the Friday they had the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington, and there was a lot of discussion about the original march in the days after John Lewis passed. And one of the things that I thought was interesting about that march, and it came out particularly because everybody focuses on I Have a Dream, which of course is one of the greatest bits of oratory ever. So it's right to talk about that. But the focus on John Lewis's speech was really fascinating because it was the first time a lot of people had heard anything about it, but it was interesting to find out about the negotiations that were going on behind the scenes, because at that time he was the 23-year-old radical. He was the youngest of the guys everybody planning the march, but he was the one seen as the radical by the Kennedy White House and some of the other organizers. So they looked at his speech and said, "Okay, brother, we have to change this line because we don't want to." We don't want to tick off our allies in Congress who are trying to get this bill through. We have to change this line because, as bad as things are in the South, we have to go back there, and we still need to organize, and we can't turn off some of our allies that are in this. We can't make it difficult. So there was this really interesting rationality between what the ideal was and what the political reality was, and how to mesh that for the purposes for the larger cause. And one of the frustrating aspects of the current moment is there's all this energy that's going on the ground at the ground level, and there's not a corresponding dialogue between the people who can actually make things happen in Washington and around the rest of the country. We're seeing some laws being passed here. The New York, for example, changed their police disciplinary codes and information, things like that. But there doesn't seem to be the direct line of communication between protesters. Obviously, the White House doesn't count, but between protesters, Congress, and other people that can actually get things done. So you can have, as in the case of the NBA, some workable demands that can result in workable solutions that can keep the movement going.
What a time we're living in where we say the White House doesn't count.
Well, yeah, no, because I mean,
it's a good place to have a rally.
No, I didn't mean it as a. I didn't mean it
No.
as a slap. I'm just talking about the comparison between, 63, where you had a president that was involved, you had members of Congress involved, and you had the protest leaders all figuring out how to get things done from their own perspective, and obviously it's slightly different right now. Yeah.
Senator on vacation.
What's that?
Well, it was August in 1963. I'm sure some of them were on vacation then too, Lana.
Right. No one took vacations back in summer vacation wasn't established until the Nixon White House. I've decided. That's how he got reelected in a landslide.
By the way, if you see
he promised summer vacation and free pizza Fridays.
If you see those pictures, if you see the pictures going back to 1963, not the pictures of the actual protesters down on the lawn, but the organizers, they're all. I mean, it's August, and they're all in suits and ties and really presenting really well. And I mean, if it's August in Washington D.C., it doesn't matter whether it's 1963 or it's 2020. It's hot as hell down there.
Yeah, the struggle was real.
But they were. I mean, they all look like ladies and gentlemen. They were dressed really professionally because they also realized there's a political image to this. They want to be taken seriously by the rest of the country, and they came dressed to be taken seriously.
Lana, thoughts on not just thank you, Marshall, for correcting me, not just the NBA, but WNBA, Major League Baseball, a few other sports,
MLS,
Major League Soccer, yep. NFL stood out. NFL said no thanks. I mean, they're not in season. But thoughts on the week that was of sports standing up.
The week that was.
Yep.
I mean, honestly, I agree with the statements that the essence behind what Robert was just talking about, which is essentially this is how it could be. This is people actually stand up, say, no, we are gonna technically hit you where it hurts, because they understood that it would be a bad economics move to cancel the playoffs. So what was it? The Lakers and the Clippers walked out. I'm a soccer fan.
A lot of teams walked out. The Lakers and the Clippers walked out of the negotiations, if I recall correctly.
Right.
But
initially,
but the and they were like, we need to have a playoff. We need to sit down and negotiate. We need to talk to them. We need to figure out, and they needed to also articulate what would get the situation resolved. It can't just be both sides saying stuff needs to change. They need to come up. When I had soldiers, I used to tell them all the time, I was like, don't just come to me and complain, come to me with solutions, because I'm not your idea fairy. So if you see a problem, show up with a solution. That's just sort of my I think that this shows potential for how things could actually happen and how changes could actually be made. It's just, and that is direct contrast to set a fire, shoot some people, and show up with no resolution.
Yeah. And blame other people.
Oh yeah, that's
always works.
That's one that everybody gets.
It's a classic that always works. Megan, thoughts on the sports uprisings?
I think it's great. Honestly, I love NBA as well. I was so proud of them when they did that. That was just amazing. Also, the WNBA has been doing this for a while, and you know, they are not like they're also not out to get the recognition. They're like, we're still going to do this. You guys don't have to praise us or anything like that. That's fine. Okay, the men just came and spoke. Great. You guys are paying attention. They're like, they're really leading this, and they're just kind of like, it's kind of like, all right, here's my dumb example. It's like when I want to say something to my parents, but I can't because they're going to say that I'm causing trouble again. But I can get my brother to say it because he's taking a stand. And sometimes we have to play this stupid, dumb game in order to get them to listen. Now, the WNBA is the ones being like, all right, listen, they're not going to take us seriously. That's kind of how it is. Unfortunately, the WNBA hasn't been taken seriously since the beginning, like when they started. People make jokes about them all the time. Very talented women, very politically charged. So I'm happy that they are leading the fight, and they also know where to get help along the way. Baseball joining in this week, that was huge. Baseball never does anything like that, and that was so powerful. And how it was so orchestrated too. Like they took the field, everybody was ready, batter up, boom, everyone out of the dugouts, stand in silence, and then they just walk off, but they leave a Black Lives Matter shirt on the plate. That was awesome.
Hey, Megan, I just want to thank you so much for remembering that, because I'm like, baseball is actually is my favorite sport more than basketball, but I wanted to do, and I'm a Yankee fan, but it was interesting that it was the Mets, and it was Dominic Smith, I believe, was the lead player who took the person who took the lead on that, and yeah, I mean that was brilliant. I mean the Yankees have done have done their own sort of Black Lives Matter things like earlier in the season and so forth, but in terms of like making a real distinct statement at a moment when, as they used to say in the 1960s, when the world is watching, kudos to the Mets for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Yankee fan as well. I'm a Mets supporter, and I think it was more powerful coming from the Mets because they are grittier. They're and also the Marlins are in there too. You're just like, that's Florida. You got like, this is a whole other can. That team's going to be dealing with a lot of shit when they go back home. But I think like if the Yankees want to come, they're kind of like the last resort almost, because they're the good boys in a way. So when they show up, it's just like, oh, the Yankees got involved. Are you kidding? They're the ones that have to have their hair cut specifically and play by the rules and
no beards. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and then it's just the Renegades over on the Mets. It's just like, we do whatever the fuck we want.
Yeah, the Mets you're too busy getting into fist fights and skipping school.
The Mets do have the reputation of being, the more blue collar team in the city, and their fan base is historically a little bit more out of borough, and so that's.
Yeah.
I think
now, if we get golf involved, now we'll know that change is really happening. Imagine them getting up there, they're about to tee off, and then all of a sudden they just drop their clubs and they're like, no. Yeah. And just walk away, but the ball says Black Lives Matter, and they leave it on the tee. Look, I just gave them the whole idea.
To be fair, that might have happened, but like, who would have known?
We wouldn't watch golf. And I think I also want to.
I think it actually said back nines matter, which is a little bit.
Oh man, very nice. Well done, Robert George.
It was time.
I think also another important thing about that, baseball. Joining the process, like that's an interesting political. Like I think polling has found NBA fans tend to be more left-leaning and registered Democrats. NFL fans tend to be a little more Republican-leaning, conservative-leaning, registered Republicans. Baseball tends to be like a mix. Like there's no sort of dominant political following of baseball fans they found in polling. So to me, what is interesting about that is just that idea of like this has there is a crossover appeal. I want to add one other thing on this, like two other things. Robert, you're absolutely right about that point about canceling the playoffs could have been a bad PR move. And then on top of it, would have fed a little bit of this narrative of that you hear from Donald Trump and the sort of like, oh, what do protests accomplish? Like they have a tangible accomplishment, in these arenas as polling places thing that can really make a difference for the entire country and for, all sides of the debate. And having that tangible accomplishment gives a lot of seriousness and validity. Another thing, and I'm not sure what amount of a role this played in the process, but I think is worth noting, is that among the owners that were sent to negotiate with the teams was Charlotte Hornets owner Michael Jordan. And that really shows you a lot of when your ownership can relate with your workforce, you can get a lot of tangible accomplishments done.
But there's something even more significant about that, Tom. I don't know how many of you saw The Last Dance on ESPN, and some of us who are a little bit older and was watching this, go back into the 80s and we're watching this in real time. It really does show how far sports has become when the icon of the cultural and sports icon of the 1980s and the 90s was Michael Jordan, and the famous quote that is attached to him, even though that was never actually nobody actually saw him or heard him say it, is that Republicans buy sneakers too. Which was the kind of the explanation, the shorthand explanation of why he didn't make more political stands in the 1980s at the height of his
any
power.
political stands.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
the closest
the closest that he did, I think, was he sent like $1,000 to Jesse Helms's Senate opponent, who was African American, Harvey Gantt, in either 1984 or 1986, one of those years. But otherwise, he did not get into politics at all, and he completely and totally avoided it. Contrast that with the Michael Jordan of today, LeBron James, who is very, very much involved in politics. People kind of talk, they sort of sarcastically call him the commissioner of the NBA, because he is happy to use his voice, use his platform and to exert political pressure as a player. So it's fascinating that you've got LeBron James and other player leaders coming together and negotiating with owners, and this ownership this time is including Michael Jordan, who is kind of getting involved in, and by the way is sending out is committing to putting aside millions for criminal justice reform and things like that. So it's fascinating how far things have come in the last 35 years or so.
Yeah, Michael Jordan's really had a nice little redemption arc over these past couple of weeks, because he's been notoriously known for not speaking up during these major moments, especially when race is involved. And it has been, nice to see his response, and especially him being the sole Black majority owner in the NBA. I feel like there's kind of a responsibility, and it would have been a real missed opportunity for him if he didn't play a major role in these negotiations and discussions. Just given his history and given his reputation, especially when, people have those barbershop compare and contrast debates between him and LeBron James, because when it comes to social issues, they're not even in the same discussion, because they really have been on polar opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, well, I mean, Michael Jordan and I are about the same age. I know I may not look at it, but it is a case. And between the two of us, we have like a net worth of over $1 billion. Yeah. So I can.
And you both won 6 NBA titles.
We both won, between the two of us, we've got 6 NBA titles. Exactly.
How
right.
many sneakers too?
Exactly.
Oh man, you couldn't even walk near a poli sci school without wearing those Air Georges back in the 2000s.
But that's the thing though. He as daring and single focused as he was on the court, he was single focused and and small c conservative off the court. And to be fair to the man, to go from being player to one of the handful of Black billionaires that there are in the United States. I'm not going to shame his game on that on that level, because I've on an incredibly small basis, just as a working professional, I've had to pick my shots as to when I want to say something about what's going on within my workspace or related, and when I need to, and when I have to shut up. And you have to you make these calls, and they can be, and you can be frustrated about it afterwards. But you do what you can, because you have to figure out when is it better to fight now for this, or just hold back and use the leverage to fight another day.